Hello, I'm David Reilly, and a very warm welcome to another edition of People and Politics. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing to the show. I'd be very grateful indeed. Joining me on the show today is literary agent and writer biographer Andrew Lownie. Andrew started digging into the royal family many years ago and has written books about the Duke of Windsor, the Mountbattens, and most recently about the former Prince Andrew and his wife Sarah Ferguson. I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion, so without further ado, welcome to People and Politics. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
The 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 last we saw of Andrew was a photograph of him in the back of the Range Rover where he was driven out of police custody. And that photograph must have gone around the world. And looking at that, do you think there's any possibility of him coming into contact with reality finally and knowing what he's done?
Well, I mean, I agree. It's a very powerful photograph. He does look absolutely terrified, and he suddenly realized the seriousness of his situation. But from all I'm getting from my sources who are close to him, that seems to be in a very temporary feeling, and he's now uh, thinks that he's still untouchable, that he will not have charges brought against him. He's complaining about moving to Marsh Farm. He wants to stay in Wood Farm, and though there's clearly a kind of palace campaign to suggest he's suicidal, all the evidence I'm getting is that he's as narcissistic and arrogant as he's always been. And I think that's also true of Sarah Ferguson. I mean, we got stories, alternatively, stories that she's suicidal and yet that she's a fighter and she's going to come back and do a big interview with Oprah and write a book. So we're getting very mixed messages, but certainly the stuff I'm getting from people close to him is that nothing really has changed. He feels no remorse for what he's done. He feels annoyed that he feels he's been picked on, and this is just a sort of press vendetta. So this is one of the problems. And if we remember, even when he was making statements in the autumn, he wasn't actually, though he was encouraged to do so, making any sort of apology for his behavior to the victims or making any sort of gesture towards them.
It's it's just astounding. Isn't it? And a few weeks ago, when I first got in touch with yourself, you were on the news a lot, talking about it, and talking about Epstein files, and things are going pretty quietly because, yeah, Donald Trump has conveniently started a war in the meantime, and have any idea what the next step will be? What's the next that we'll hear or happen?
Well, we've got lots of things happening. I mean, clearly we've had Melania's statement a few days ago, which has sort of put Epstein back center stage, and we may get people coming forward to talk about uh, how Melania met Trump and the suggestions that she may have met him through Epstein. That's certainly what I put in my book, and Trump didn't like. I think we're going to see the continuing investigation of Andrew. I think there are 11 police forces now. That's going to take time, but we may well see some developments there. We're getting people being subpoenaed by the Oversight Committee, so we're getting some more testimony coming out in Congress and the Senate. And I think we're going to have more victims coming forward, particularly if they feel that there's been a bit of a cover-up. So this story isn't going to die. And we've got to remember also, we've got 3 million pages, which people are still working through of the Epstein releases. And there will be new connections made there. I've got the paperback of my book, which has new information coming out the 21st of May. I'm sure there are lots of books being researched and written at the moment about Epstein based on the disclosures. So this story is going to keep going, and I suspect, there are going to be fresh revelations, not least about Andrew's involvement, over the coming months.
Wow. Your book's been described by other males as the most damning criticism of the senior royal family, at the Times described it as the most looting book for the royals. When you were writing about, was it a moment or instant where you thought, this is gonna go right big because uh, did you know that lots of people would, like myself, would get in touch and so was it a moment when you knew how important it was going to be?
Yes, I mean, after the book came out, I had a lot of people get in touch with me, and they get in touch with me to this day. And I've got about 100,000 words of new material from those people, on top of all the press coverage of what's been happening. So there's a lot of material there. The updated paperback is about 10,000 words, but there's room clearly for a new book, which I'm writing called Untitled. And it is gratifying to see that the Epstein releases have confirmed what my research told me, my sources. I mean, I think the power of the Epstein releases is that we're seeing, literally emails of him sharing confidential information, uh, being pretty dismissive of women, all these things. I'm relying on interviews because no documents have been released. Whereas here in the Epstein releases, we're getting very much an insider's view from people from him and his cohorts. I mean, David Stern and David Rowlands and others. So it's a very immediate and powerful insight into the way that they're thinking and what they were doing.
Now, what did it take you back about? Because you had a read, I mean, and you've still got a very successful career as a literary agent, journalist, publicist. But you've taken a real interest in the royal family. You've written about the Duke of Windsor, about Mountbatten. Where did that interest start? And what was the thing that made you get really interested in the royals?
Well, I had to be honest, I had no interest in the royals until a few years ago. My first book was a book on Edinburgh, a literary guide to Edinburgh. I then wrote a biography of John Buchan. After that, I moved into intelligence studies and wrote a book on Guy Burgess. And it's from Guy Burgess I kind of moved into royal biography. Because having read the Guy Burgess or written the Guy Burgess book, I realized there was a gap for a good book on the Earl Mountbatten, who'd been at the same prep school and at Dartmouth, just before Burgess. And then I think having done that book, I kind of realized that royal biography wasn't actually well served by historians. It was mainly written by journalists who didn't do very much research. And so there was a huge opportunity there. And so I did a book on Edward VIII. And all my books, I've tried to shift the dial to try and change people's perceptions,
Yeah.
because I think there's no point repeating what people have written before. I mean, clearly you have to follow the evidence. But I just felt that there was a curated story with royal biography and we weren't being told the truth. So on the book on Edward VIII, I was able, I hope, to show that he was much more sympathetic to the Germans than people had realized. And each of those books was also a study of a marriage, which allowed me to do both the private and the public life. And that's what drew me to the Andrew and Sarah Ferguson book. There hadn't been a book on them, a proper book ever. He was in the news with the Epstein revelations. I started researching this book in 2021, so 2 years after the Newsnight interview. And I felt that there was a story to tell there, particularly about his involvement as a trade envoy, which I think he had abused his position in order to make money for himself. And we were getting signs of that in newspapers, but no one had brought the whole thing together. So the whole thing grew. And all my books also are about establishment cover-ups, the cover-up of Burgess's flight to Moscow, and indeed other Cambridge spies, the cover-up of Edward's treachery with the suppression of the German documents, the Marburg files. And here I felt there was a suppression of the story, that Andrew's activities had been well known by the royal family, but they'd ensured that the press didn't cover it.
Mm.
So there's always that other element to the story about, say, this establishment cover-up. And it proved a very rich seam, and I was very lucky with my timing. The book came out in August, just as the
Oh,
story broke. And it's sort of snowballed since then, because clearly we've had Virginia Giuffre's book, we've had leaks about Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's links with Epstein, we've had the release of the Epstein material. And this has all played into and supported some of the research that I did. So I've been very lucky.
I I I I think is that there's been 4 years of research go into this book. And that's more than evident in its pages, by reading the book, it's so evident the work that's gone into this. So so how did it start? What was the first bit that you researched
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it was very important that the book should be well sourced, because I knew I would have brickbats thrown at me, and they continue to be thrown at me, that I'm not a serious historian and I'm just a gossip monger. One of the problems is a lot of people do speak off the record, so you're not going to always get everything backed up. But I had to supply evidence to the lawyers because we were worried that we would be sued if we didn't. Um, but I always wanted to write books, and I think I always wanted to do biography, because I'm a great believer that people do shape history, and that you need to humanize history. I'm not a believer in the great movements of history and Marxist interpretation. I think that people do shape history, as we've seen time and time again, whether it's um, Edward VIII having to abdicate because of Wallace Simpson, or the Mountbatten's behavior in India pushing forward Indian independence much quicker than perhaps it should have been. Or Guy Burgess, being drawn in to spy for Russia, and being given the access he had through particular jobs he was given. So people are really important in driving events. Literary biography I love doing. I love writing about Scotland, but clearly that's not as commercial as writing about royal biography. Intelligence biography, I may well go back to. I think it's a really interesting area. A lot of new materials being released in the archives. There are two new books on the Cambridge spies coming out in the coming months based on new releases. And though I think I stand by my book, because I managed to interview a lot of people who are now dead, these new interviews from MI5 or some of the people involved do shed some fresh light on the subject. And then royal biography, I say, is interesting because there are very few serious writers doing it. There's clearly a huge public appetite. There's a huge gap, really, between the picture that's presented in the press and the reality as you begin to
yeah,
research it.
yeah.
So I'm doing Prince Philip next, a really interesting man, very complex man. And I don't think he's really had the justice he deserves in terms of shaping the modern monarchy. And all these books are about, well, increasingly my books about the royal family are becoming about how, I suppose, corrupt it is, how the need for change, and it needs to modernize, become less secretive. So that's become another underlying sort of theme in the books, the importance for them to reform in order to survive.
How wide do you think the gap is between the narrative that the public see about the royal family and the press, and the actual reality of the reality of the royal family? How wide do you think that gap is?
Well, I think the gap is quite wide. It's difficult to know because, of course, we don't always know what stories are being hidden and what secrets have been maintained. But I think, and often it has to be speculation. It's often because we're not in possession of all the information. Why, is Beatrice at one point not invited to Ascot, and on the next moment they are invited? Is this a power play between the King and the Prince of Wales? Is it because someone has changed their mind? It's difficult sometimes to work out. And as we all know, I mean, there's no single explanation sometimes to events. It depends on different people's perceptions of what happened, and you can find lots of evidence to support one case or another. But I do think that there's an awful lot of window dressing, a lot of performative stuff that's done. So, we have the king saying that, the royal family will cooperate with the law and let justice be done. And on the other hand, I'm hearing increasing stories of people working for the royal family, people working for the civil service who are having pressure put on them not to speak openly and reminded of their obligations of confidentiality. And you can't have it both ways. So, a lot of stuff is said, we've got rid of Andrew's titles. Well, actually, they haven't really. Or he's suicidal, but actually he's not suicidal. So there's an awful lot of spin and, I say, creation of a particular narrative, which doesn't always reflect the reality of the situation.
You said that people were asked not to speak clearly, openly, particularly civil service, and made me go back to you face a lot of resistance to not just this book, to the Mountbatten's book, and you put in countless freedom of information requests, and you've come up against a lot of resistance, which has cost you personally a lot. And I wonder if you could talk about that aspect of it, please.
Yes, I mean, there has been a lot of criticism, and that comes with the territory. I mean, clearly, if you're trying to change people's views on things and providing a slightly different view, particularly for royalists, where the royal family can do nothing wrong, then there's going to be criticism. It's not always very well informed. I mean, that's the problem with social media and having comments in newspapers. People sound off often anonymously. But I have to kind of stick with what I find, and I have no agenda. I'm a monarchist, but doesn't mean that they should be allowed to behave as they want and to take advantage of their position. And I put my reputation on the line. I have to back up everything I say. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I had a lot of criticism with the Mountbatten book because one of the things I discovered was that Mountbatten was abusing young boys, that there were FBI reports saying that. There was also testimony from people saying that. I hope I made the case that there was this dark secret at the center of his life. It doesn't take away from many of his achievements, but it shows him to be a much more complex figure than people realized. And Mountbatten himself said that his biography should be warts and all. We're got beyond the Victorians and the hagiography that they kind of produced. But it did cost me. I also discovered that the private diaries and letters of Lord and Lady Mountbatten, which had been bought with public funds to be opened to the public, had not actually been opened. And I fought a big campaign for them to be opened. We did succeed in 99% of the stuff being released, 33,000 pages. But in doing that case, I found myself liable for legal costs, which I'd thought by winning the case I would not have to pay. And it cost me about £500,000, and I had to basically liquidate all my savings, remortgage my house, etc. So this new book has kind of brought me back to the position I was in sort of 6, 7 years ago.
Right.
And when you're in your 60s, that's a slightly frightening position to be in. But I felt it was an important principle. My book had actually already, by the time of the court case, come out, but I felt that it was important that this material should be made available, that the only way it would become public was if I continued the fight. And though I got some money from crowdfunding, I only got 75,000 of the 500,000. So it was quite a big hit. And I just felt there was an important principle there. And I hope uh, that other people feel that that was an important battle to fight. scholars are now using this 33,000 pages. I think it will reshape the view we have of Mountbatten. There are lots of insights into everything from the Second World War through to Indian independence, social life in the 1930s, etc. So, it's important. It was seen as probably the most important collection of papers after the Churchill papers at Churchill College. Um, but yeah, that is the price one pays. I think the sadness was that more historians weren't prepared to stand up and support me in public, because I think, with more support, we could have achieved more. There are many papers that are still closed. We're actually in a terrible situation where freedom of information law is going backwards. We're having files that were open now being closed. We're having the cost compliance limit on whether files are released under freedom of information reduced from 600 to £450, which is about 2 hours work by a civil servant. So it's our liberties are being challenged, and if we don't know the truth about the past, if we can't have access to the documents of our history, then we are living in a banana republic, and we are being denied the story of our own country.
So on the basis of that, is the government complicit in covering up the royal affairs and the royal finances and the truth about the royals? Is the government complicit?
Yes, I think all governments, I mean, not just this one. I mean, there are a lot of things that could be done. We had a parliamentary debate on Prince Andrew, or the former Prince Andrew, but Erskine May says that basically Parliament isn't allowed to ask questions about the royal family, and that still stands. And I think that's one very easy change that could be made by a government. A government could introduce legislation for the royal family to pay tax, to not just income tax, but capital gains and inheritance tax. I think there's a good case we made for proper scrutiny of the sovereign grant, which is actually they're paid far more than they need. It's done on a percentage of their earnings rather than their needs. I think there needs to be much more openness about the cost of royal security. So yes, I mean the government, was different governments. I mean over the years that Andrew was operating, there were both conservative, Lib conservative and Labour governments, and they allowed Andrew to operate in the way he did. They supported him with these private jets and helicopters. They covered up his activities, and they've been responsible for the reluctance. In fact, the no files on Andrew have really been released, particularly on his time as a trade envoy, though they should be under the 20-year rule. So yeah, of course, governments are deeply involved. It's not just the royal family who have been not very open about things. And that needs media pressure, parliamentary pressure, and I think possibly even legal pressure, some sort of judicial challenge.
Excuse me. Uh, the king has stripped Andrew of his titles, and the king is trying to be seen to be open and saying that they'll cooperate with the police. Anything that needs to be done. Do you take that at face value, or is that a smokescreen?
I'm afraid I don't believe the king is really letting the law take its course, and I don't think Andrew will face charges. I think the first thing Andrew will do is say, I'm going to call my brother, the king, to give evidence. And since the king can't get evidence in his own courts, the case will collapse. The royal family have known about Andrew for years. I mean, this story has been in the press for 15 years. There have been direct correspondence with the king and with the queen, highlighting, for example, his associations with David Rowland, and the way he was abusing his trade position. There have been court cases where there have been large unexplained sums of money, 1.3 million in the Salman Turk case. We had in 2010 Sarah Ferguson caught on film trying to sell access to Andrew for £500,000. So this should be no surprise to the royal family, but there's no evidence that they've ever done anything in response to this. When my book came out, beyond people trying to discredit it and me, no one actually said, well, these are some quite serious allegations, let's look into them. It was only, I'm afraid, that the king being heckled at Lichfield and the drip drip feed of Epstein revelations that have forced the royal family to do anything. And even then, I'd argue it's been too little, too late. And everything has been forced out of them rather than trying to get ahead of the story.
And do you think what will happen is, and I'm better, I don't like this idea, but I'm concerned that Andrew will disappear off somewhere, either in the UK or abroad, and have a very quiet life somewhere off the radar, and that would end the matter. Do you get a sense of that being a possibility?
Yes, I mean I've long argued that he's a flight risk. I mean, Mandelson was supposedly arrested because he was about to flee. Juan Carlos, basically, King Juan Carlos of Spain evaded justice there by going off to Dubai. And it would solve a lot of problems for the royal family if Andrew was to disappear. Uh, he would basically be out of public circulation. There would be very little chance of any media coverage. He could get on quietly with his business activities without any proper oversight in a much warmer climate. And so I don't see Andrew ending his days in Sandringham at Marsh Farm. I think he will escape. It could be embarrassing. I mean, the royal family are meant to be keeping an eye on him. He's got protection officers around him. But I think that would be a very neat solution for the royal family. The last thing they want is a trial. The last thing they want is continued publicity about Andrew's activities. And this is justice denied. I think, a lot of victims feel that Andrew hasn't been held properly accountable for what he's done, not just his sex trafficking or involvement in sex trafficking, but also, of course, his the corruption charges which could be brought, his malfeasance in public office, the fact that he was trading sensitive commercial information and defense information with people who shouldn't be seeing it. Um, all of this, these are very serious matters which should be tested in court, but I fear are not going to be.
Uh, uh, I'm right in saying that if you break the ministerial code or the official secrets act, am I right in saying that that is viewed as a very serious crime indeed, for which people ought to end up in prison, but we're very unlikely to see that happening. And even in Peter Mandelson's case.
Well, Peter Mandelson will be interesting because if they bring charges against Mandelson, they're going to have to bring charges against Andrew because their offences are very similar. And so it'll be very interesting to see how Mandelson gets off. If he does get off, he clearly can't play the same defense of his brother appearing in court. So, that's the one bit of hope that if Mandelson is charged, that Andrew will also have to be charged. I was talking to a detective the other day who was arguing that actually there could be a case against Andrew in America. He's committed crimes there. Though he's a British citizen, he could be extradited if the authorities here allowed that. Um, but I think one of the worrying things is that we on our side refused to basically let Andrew go and talk to the Americans originally. There was a mutual legal assurance treaty that they refused, Priti Patel. And now I understand the Americans are playing hardball and being difficult in terms of sharing the redacted material with the British police. Mark Reilly was across there the other day. And that seems extraordinary that you would think that these law enforcement would be cooperating to bring justice to the victims rather than playing these games. And I just hope that there is no truth in some of those suggestions.
Yeah.
It is important that all these people, not just Mandelson and Andrew, but also some of the other names that have come up in the Epstein files, are brought to justice. At the moment, only Ghislaine Maxwell is actually serving a prison service sentence for what was going on. And there are clearly a lot of people in the frame and a lot of people who should be subject to police inquiry at the moment.
Yeah. I think you said that you've still got You still got a lot of papers that you've not published, no commanders. That there's still lots of Epstein files. So is a lot more to see the light of day on the story of Andrew, or do you think it'll peter out?
Yes, I think there's lots more to come out. I mean, there are millions more pages of Epstein revelations, which, perhaps if there is a legal battle or pressure, parliamentary pressure in America, might well be released, a change of government, for example. Um, we have, I think, more victims likely to come forward, and perhaps even using the parliamentary privilege to actually name names in Congress or the Senate. We have the possibility of a parliamentary investigation here into Andrew's time as a trade envoy. We may have legal depositions that are unsealed in previous cases. There is clearly a lot of material in the material that's been released that could perhaps, with proper full investigation, reveal new co-conspirators, new information. People are coming forward to me, and I'm sure they're going forward to journalists and other writers with material. So, yeah, lots more still to come out, I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm sure that you're head of the Biography Society, and yeah, could you tell us about how much that you get personally from doing it? I'm assuming you know, you get tremendous gratification, and so can you talk about about the personal journey for you?
Well, the Biographers Club I set up now almost 30 years ago as a sort of a mixture of a trade union for biographers and a sort of talking shop, possibly a sort of pressure group to promote biography. And I ran it for many years. I'm now sort of the president, so I take very much a back seat. But and there's now another organization called Biographers International Organization, which is an American-based organization on whose advisory board I sit. And I think, they do both of them, I hope, good work in terms of raising the profile of biography, helping biographers with sharing research, some of the problems that we engage in, lobby for things like freedom of information, access to archives. So, yeah, biography in some ways, particularly in the academy, particularly in academia, is not really taken as seriously as it should be. It's not uh, um, in the way that raw biography and intelligence biography is not taken seriously. And I think that's a shame because, these are legitimate areas of concern. Intelligence history is often seen as the hidden dimension. Royal biography is clearly a very important part of our island history.
Yeah.
And the more we can uh, uh, raise awareness of these subjects, both of which are very popular, of course, with the population in terms of reading and in terms of publishing, the better.
You do you do phenomenal amount of research for your book, and it takes years of work. And presumably you must enjoy the process of the research and find it right. And do you find it really gratifying when you uncover things?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I mean, the research in many ways is the best bit. It's only when sometimes you kind of keep going because you want to put off the writing. Yeah, I mean, I remember all sorts of moments, finding the FBI file on Mountbatten, going off to Saffron Walden and interviewing a man called Ron Perks, who'd been Mountbatten's chauffeur in the 1940s, with stories about being told to know where the male brothel in Malta was because he would want to go there. Um, so lots and lots of things, interviewing people for the book on Andrew, his former commanding officer in the Falklands, his naval mentor, people who work very closely with him. That of course is very, very exciting, the sense that you're breaking new ground and revealing new information. So that's always the thing that drives one, whether one's out trying to find people to interview, and I think I managed to get about 300 people to talk to me for the Andrew book, or just discovering documents,
Yeah.
and I will always go to the ends of the earth to find material which hasn't been looked at before. A lot of fascinating new material on, for example, the Duke of Windsor in American archives, which no one had bothered looking at, um, which really painted a particularly different picture of him, particularly after the abdication in his time in Paris in the 1930s. So yeah, that's what drives one on, and research is so important. And I'm afraid, a lot of writers just don't do the legwork they need to. They rely on secondary sources, when actually we always need to go right back to the primary sources and to ensure that they're as accurate as possible.
That it must be very satisfying and very, yeah, very fulfilling to do that sort of work. I think people probably rely a lot on the internet and sources of on the internet, which may or may not be uh, the right true information. So people probably rely on that to help with them as well. And you describe yourself as a monarchist, and you would like to see it reform in the monarchy. But what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I am a monarchist. I support the institution. I think it holds the nation together. It does a lot of great work, particularly in terms of soft power and diplomacy. And, most members of the royal family behave properly and they don't take advantage of the privilege in order to make money for themselves. But, the compact between the people and the monarchy is about trust and respect. And that, I'm afraid, Andrew has undermined because of his behavior. But I do think that there is growing concern about the privileges the royal family enjoy, um, the tax breaks they get for what are basically commercial estates, the lack of oversight into their behavior, which has allowed Andrew to behave as badly as he done for so long because there was no scrutiny. And I think in their own interests, they need to modernize and reform in order to continue to command support. And if they have nothing to hide, they have nothing to worry about.
Yeah,
So it should be very simple, for example, to allow parliamentary scrutiny, to have debates on the royal financing, to review the Duchy of Lancaster and Cornwall estates, to look at the way the royal family are financed in future, to remove the exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act that relate to the royal family, so they're subject to all the same rules as everyone else. Royal wills are sealed for them when everyone else's wills are open. That would be another change. There could be a register of royal gifts, a register of royal business activities. There could be the opening of Buckingham Palace and the gardens because there's no longer a security threat there. They're no longer there. Uh, there are lots of things they could do that would win back public support and trust. And I think what's so extraordinary is they're doing nothing at the moment. They're just sitting on their hands, hoping the problem's going to go away. And I think in the days of a less deferential media and a stronger social media, that really isn't a tenable position any longer.
no, 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 I think they'll have to do something in the future. Um, another thing I wanted to ask you is what do you think will become of Beatrice and Eugenie? Because it must be pretty difficult for them. Are they implicated in their mum and dad's behavior? I'm aware that they've met Epstein and they were taken. So are they part of the equation?
Yes, I think the daughters are very much involved with their parents' business activities. We know from the Selman Turk case that money was being fenced through the children's accounts. We know that they were given presents and gifts of jewelry and things by people who were doing business with the parents. They were taken on a lot of these taxpayer-funded trade trips in order to build their contacts book, that they're exploiting that contacts book with the work they're doing now, particularly in the Middle East. Beatrice is promoting Saudi banks and things. So I think there's any doubt that they're deeply involved. I think the royal family have kind of woken up to that and the need to distance themselves from the daughters. If the daughters are squeaky clean, there should be no problem about them, for example, giving up their titles, giving up their subsidized accommodation in Kensington and St. James's Palace, and retiring into a private life. But, they are, I'm afraid, been exploiting their royal positions for their own personal gain for years. They don't want to give up that position. And I'm sure a deal was done to get Andrew out of Royal Lodge, that he said that, you will take care of my daughters, they won't lose their titles, they won't lose their position in the line of succession. And that's the dilemma that the king is now wrestling with, because if more embarrassing revelations come out about the daughters in the coming months, then he's going to be look rather weak. The fact that he's
Yeah.
trying to include them in royal events. They've been invited to Sandringham for Christmas. They're going to go to Ascot in the summer. Uh, um, and, they will, in some ways, be damaging to the royal brand.
Mm.
My own feeling is that they should voluntarily give up their positions. If they refuse to do so, they should be basically removed from basically the work. They're not working roles, but from uh, royal circles. In the way that Princess Margaret's children are no longer involved in royal events. They don't go to Sandringham and stuff, and they've just got their own careers. I think, again, very tellingly, both daughters were asked to provide an audit of their business activities, which they refused to do. So, it would make much more sense, for both the Sussexes and the Yorks to basically be cut loose from the royal family, to have a very slimmed down monarchy, which is focused entirely on the king, the Prince of Wales, and his descendants. And everyone else goes off and has to earn their own living.
Right. Well, I thought that might happen because what happened to Beatrice and Eugenia? They're never going to be poor. They're never going to be hard up home. So yeah. So the final thing I wanted to ask is, do you think the king should go to America next month for a state visit with Mr. Trump?
Uh, Sorry, I think the king should, yes. I think the king should be more open about his medical condition. I think that there's a strong case for him. Well, who knows how long he has, but I think we're seeing increasingly William calling the shots. We're in a sort of transitional phase of the monarchy, and I do think that Charles should take the opportunity of his reign to bring the reforms that are necessary, so that William can start with a completely clean slate. Um, but I do think that he needs to be more open about his health. I mean, clearly, there's always a debate about what's private and what's public, but this has huge constitutional implications, and I don't think that we do know how seriously ill he is. And clearly that makes him a slightly sort of lame duck monarch. But I think it would win him a lot of sympathy, and I think it would give a little bit more certainty to what the future holds. And when William might be taking over, and it would perhaps allow William to be slightly more open about what he intends to do when he becomes king.
Do you think the king should go to America next month for a state visit with Donald Trump?
Yes, I mean, I think that the little sort of spat going on at the moment is minor compared to the importance of the king celebrating, this 250th anniversary. I think it is important that he is seen to be above politics. I think he'd say the soft power that he can exert could actually improve relations between Britain and America. It's important that they are restored. I mean, Trump, clearly is a bully, and one wants to stand up to bullies. But at the same time, I think when someone goes low, you aim high, as Barack Obama said. And we shouldn't play Trump's rather petty game. We should be kind of more dignified and statesmanlike. And it may be the king can't go because of health, but I think if he can go, he should.
Yeah. We'll wait and see. Um, Andrew, I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you this morning, and I'm very, very grateful for your time, and I really look forward to read the latest edition of the book and subsequent books to come. So everyone, thank you very much.
Well, pleasure. Very nice to talk to you, and I wish you all the best.
Either, thank you.